Hello, and welcome back to Dark Academia Queen. My name is Breezy, and here we talk about many topics. If you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, please hit that subscribe button. Also, happy 4th of July. Can you believe it's already the 4th? I can't believe it. It sounds crazy. But I'm also up at 2 o'clock in the morning doing a podcast episode because my insomnia is keeping me up at night, keeping me from sleeping. Anyway, um, I have a question for you. What does Ralph Waldo Emerson and Nathaniel Hawthorne have in common? Well, they are both actually. There's many answers to that question. We're gonna go ahead and put that one out there. But I think the answer we're looking for refers to why you clicked on this video. It's transcendentalism, and yeah, they were both transcendentalist, and this was a philosophical, spiritual, literary movement that developed in the late 1820s and 1830s. And this was in New England region, and it was a core belief that it was the inherent goodness of people and nature, while society had its intuition, and his intuitions have been corrupted by purity of the individual. Now, they also saw a divine experience to inherit every day rather than believing in a distant heaven. So, and they also see a physical and spiritual phenomena as part of a dynamic process, um, rather than a discrete entities. So, this was one of the first philosophical. It's also important to note this was one of the most first philosophical currents that emerged in the U.S. And it's therefore a key early point in American history philosophy. Now, it emphasized the subject, like I said earlier, of intuition over objective empiricalism. Empiricism. And adherence believes that the individuals are capable of generating completely original insights with little attention and deference to disposed transcendentalists. So, in its rise in the was a protest against the general state of intellectualism and the spirituality of the time. The doctrine of the Unitarian Church, as taught by a Harvard Divinity School, was relatively related. So, how did this emerge? Well, this came from the Armin, the Armin, the German and English Romanticism, the biblical criticisms of Johann Gottfried Herder and Friedrich Schleiermacher, the skepticism of David Hume, and the philosophy of Immanuel Kant and German idealism. So, Perry Miller, an author valorous, regard Emanuel Swedenborg and Jacob, is it Jacob or Jacob? Because let's see, it's spelled with a K and it's still in Sweden spelling. Anyway, Jacob Boehme as a perversive influence of this now. Let's talk about its origin. Well, this is very closely related to Unitarianism, a religious movement in Boston in the early 19th century, and it stated that it was developed after Unitarianism took hold at Harvard University following the elections of Henry Ware as the Hollis Professor of Divinity in 1805 and John Thornton Kirtland as president in 1810. Now, this was not a rejection of Unitarianism. Let's go ahead and clarify that. It was not a rejection, but instead it was a more developed organic consequence of the Unitarian emphasis on the free conscience and value of the intellectual reason. So, transcendentalists, they were not content with sobriety, mildness, um, and calm rationalism and Unitarianism. Instead, they longed for a more intense spiritual experience. Thus, transcendentalism was not born as a counter movement, but a parallel movement to the various ideas that was introduced by Unitarians. So, who was in this little club? Well, this thing was Ralph Waldo Emerson was part of it. and he became a coherent and this became very coherent in a sacred organization with the founding of the Transcendental Club in Cambridge on September 12, 1836, by prominent New England intellectuals, including George Putnam, Emerson, Frederick Henry Hedge, and other members would include Sophie Ripley, Margaret Fuller, Elizabeth Peabody. Does that name sound familiar? I talked about the Peabody name before. Sturgis Hooper, Caroline Sturgis Tappan, Almas Branson Alcock. So many authors were and political politicians were in this as well. So from 1840, the group frequently published in a journal called the Dow along with other venues. So when did the second wave take place? So by the late 1840s, it was believed that this movement was dying out, and even more so was the death of Margaret Fuller in 1850. Um, Now the underlying theme of the majority of the essays and like everything and papers were like they all center around the subject, which would assert a love of an individual expression, and the groups were mostly struggled aesthetes. The wealthiest among them was Samuel Gray Ward, who, after a few contributions to the Dow, focused on the many careers. So, what were the beliefs of the Transcendentalist? Well, there was a strong belief in the power of the individual that are primarily concerned with personal freedom. Their beliefs also closely linked to those of the Romantics, but differ by an attempt to embrace or at least to open the empiricisms of science. So, what do we know about this knowledge now? Well, they desire to have a ground their religion in philosophy and the principles based upon the German Romanticisms of Johann. So is it Johann or Johann? I want to say it's Johann. Gertrude Herder and Frederick Schleiermacher. It emerged as a German and English Romanticism. Now, early transcendentalists, they were largely unacquainted with the German philosophy in the original and relied primarily on the writings of Thomas Carlyle, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Victor Cousin, Germain de Stael, and other English and French commentators for their knowledge of it. And the Transcendentalist movement can be described as an American outgrowth of the English Romanticism. So, and one thing they really did focus on was individualism and everything as well. There was also many like focuses on like Indian religions that helped play a part in it, and it's formally rooted in the Western philosophical traditions of Platonism, Napoleonism, German idealism, and Transcendentalism were also directly influenced by Indian religions. Thoreau and Walden spoke of the Transcendentalist debt to the Indian religious directly. So another famous one was Henry David Thoreau. And in the morning, so yeah, idealism was also a key belief here. And so it differs the interpretation of the practical aims of the will, but some adherent links with the utopian social change. Brownson, for example, connected it with early socialism, but it was considered to be exclusively individualist and idealist project. Emerson believed that the latter, in 1842 lecture to Transcendentalist, suggested the goal was purely an outlook on life that was impossible to reach and attain. There's also something else to remember is the importance of nature. They have very deep gratitude and appreciation for nature, not only for the aesthetic purposes, but also for a tool to observe and understand the structured inner working of the natural world. Um, I think it's safe to say that Emerson was a clear believer in all of this. But how does this make influence on other movements? Well, Transcendentalism, it was the first notable American intellectual movement that inspired the succeeding generations of American intellectuals as well as some literary movements. So, it influenced the growing mind of mental sciences of the mid 19th century. It also would become later known as the New Thought movement. And the New Thought considers Emerson as an intellectual father as well. And this also would include Emma Curtis Hopkins, um, Ernest Holmes, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and Melinda Kramer and Nona L. Brooks. So this is also now Transcendentalism is also influenced by Hinduism as well. Who are some major figures? Well, Margaret Fuller was one of them. Some other prominent ones, as I said, were Alcott, Timothy Brooks, Orcus Bronson, William L. Channing. I wonder if you related to Channing Tatum. Now, with all movements, there's a criticism. Dark academia has many criticism. So, what does transcendentalist have? Criticism for that? Well, many suggest that their position was beyond sanity and reason. Hawthorne wrote in his novel, The Blithedale Romance, satirizing the movement, and is based on the experience of he had at Brook Farm, which was a short-lived utopian community that was founded on the transcendental principles. In Poe's satire, How to Write a Blackwood Article and Never Bet the Devil Your Head, the majority of the ridicules transcendentalism, elsewhere calling it a frog pondidium. After the pun in the Boston Common, in the later specifically mentions the mentions of the flagship journal, the Dow, and though Poe denied that he had any specific targets, he attacked this movement writings by calling it a metaphor run mad. But yeah. Alright, that is it for this episode. What do y'all think of this movement? I am curious. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day and a happy 4th. And remember, stay safe. Do not make any stupid decisions tonight, y'all.